Features are one of the most powerful parts of Worldgen, responsible for populating biomes with everything from bamboo, to forest rocks, to coral reefs. I've explored several features in depth at an individual level, but there are so many more I've yet to cover. So today, I'm going to be ranking every Worldgen feature in Minecraft. Now, it should be no secret that not all features are created equal. I'll be placing each feature in 5 tiers, based on how good they are from a Worldgen perspective. Even though you literally need ores to be able to upgrade tools and craft better items in normal gameplay, that may or may not have any bearing on whether the ore feature type is good or bad. We'll be considering how configurable each feature is, how broadly applicable it is for different Worldgen tricks, and whether or not the vanilla game uses them to its full potential. We have 49 features to get through, so let's get started. The tier list I'm using lumps a few features together under this box icon here. It includes things like simple block, random selector, and the no op feature, which can be used when you don't want a feature to place anything. These aren't features one thinks about when talking about features broadly, but they are a critical piece of infrastructure. Vanilla uses the random selector and similar feature types to, of course, randomly select between various other features. This is how you get an assortment of trees in forests, for example. The oak trees, fancy oak trees, and birch trees that you see here are all placed by one feature that then randomly selects between all the various tree features. And of course, the simple block feature type is what's used by various patch-like features to actually place the single blocks that they're creating patches of. So it's how we get all this short grass, bushes, and pumpkins that are part of larger patch features. For all of these reasons, I'm going to put technical features overall in the S tier. Next up, we have the Nether Forest Vegetation feature type. As the name might imply, it is used in the Crimson and Warped Forest biomes and places the various roots, sprouts, and fungi that you see here during world generation. It's also used for the features that get placed when you use Bonemeal on Crimson or Warped Nylium. Raise your hand if you just learned today that using Bonemeal to grow flowers and things actually places features. Now, although the blocks that this feature places are configurable with a block state provider, at its core, it's just a worse version of some other features, and is largely an artifact of some older Worldgen design principles from before the Caves and Cliffs update. There's little reason to use this feature over better ones that can do the same thing, so this is actually F tier. Skipping ahead a little bit, let's talk about the bonus chest. This feature is responsible for placing the bonus chest when you start a world, if you enable the bonus chest during world creation. It isn't technically a part of Worldgen since it doesn't actually appear in any biomes feature lists, it simply gets generated where you spawn when you select it in the world creation screen. As you might expect, it doesn't have any useful Worldgen applications, so while it is useful for gameplay, it is F tier for us. Next up, this cave vine icon that has the glowberries on it represents block columns. And these are a lot more useful than you might initially think. Although vanilla only uses them for a handful of things like the cave vines we see hanging from the ceiling of the lush caves, or cacti in deserts, the ability to stack a semi-arbitrary number of block state providers on top of each other can be used to create all kinds of unique shapes and designs, especially when combined with other features. We'll get to even more use cases for block columns when we talk about some other features later, but for now, you're gonna have to trust me that this is S tier. Now, the underwater magma feature is kinda difficult to place. Although it does feature some configurability with regards to how and where it gets placed outside of placement modifiers in the placed feature, it can still only ever place magma blocks. While these serve a primarily gameplay function, and that function could be served just fine with other features, the fact that it has some configurability makes it a little bit better than something like the Nether Forest Vegetation if you need a feature that does exactly this. So we're going to be a little charitable and put this in C tier. And that brings us to vegetation patches. Now, if you've seen some of my recent videos, you know that vegetation patches are one of the most powerful features in the game. Their ability to replace blocks on the floor and ceiling, as well as place features based on those replaced blocks, opens up some powerful doors for surface texturing and the ability to stack multiple features reliably in the same place. It should go without saying that even though vanilla only uses these sparingly, vegetation patches are S tier. We're going to put it above block columns, but below the technical features just due to their broad utility. Now this icon lumps together both dripstone clusters and pointed dripstone, two separate features. Dripstone clusters, as well as their smaller pointed dripstone neighbors, are technically somewhat configurable, but because you can't change the blocks that they're made of, they're once again really only useful if you want to do exactly the thing they're already doing. They do their job well, but they're pretty niche, so we'll once again put them in C tier. Now, I'm going to go out on a potentially controversial limb here and actually put root systems in A tier. This feature is used to place tall columns of rooted dirt that extend from azalea trees on the surface like this, down to the ceilings of lush cave biomes. Although technically, it's more accurate to say that they extend from the lush cave up to the surface where they place an azalea tree feature. Even though vanilla uses them only in this one instance, and it's another one of those things that is really good at one niche thing, it's my belief that they have some really cool, unexplored Worldgen applications from a practical perspective. And since they are quite configurable and can place any feature type at the surface, I think they are worthy of A tier. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more Worldgen, custom structures, and data pack content. If you'd like to learn more about custom Worldgen and biome features, check out the link in the description for my very thorough written guide that I made for Data Pack Hub, where I am an official helper. Next on the tier list, we have the Multiface growth feature, which is used to place both glow lichen all throughout the underground, as well as these small bits of Sculk veins in the deep dark biome. They have a little bit of configurability, but I think are most important as a way simpler method to place specifically glow lichen, Sculk veins, and the new resin clump block, which have a lot of block states, without needing to list every single block state with a bunch of block predicate filters to check if there's actually a block on that face to support it. Now, lumped in with this feature, we also have the Sculk vein feature, which is responsible for these huge veins of Sculk blocks, as well as the blocks that appear on top of them, Sculk sensors, Sculk shriekers, and Sculk catalysts. These are also very configurable and work kinda like vegetation patches, but they obviously create much more organic shapes that can cover the walls as well as floors and ceilings. However, they are hard-coded to only be able to place Sculk and those associated Sculk blocks on the top surface. You can configure how often those things are placed, but it does mean that this feature is only really good at doing this one thing. Because of the theoretical utility of multiface growths, as we get more of those blocks that have a bunch of block states, and the configurability that Sculk veins offer, I will put these in C tier alongside that dripstone stuff. Now, you'll notice I've been skipping over a lot of these features: bamboo, kelp, sea pickles, and now we're up to seagrass, twisting vines, and weeping vines. Although these are all separate feature types on the tier list, I'm lumping them together as what I call legacy vegetation features. They all have limited but non-zero configurability, typically controlling the density that the vegetation actually gets placed at. But by and large, they are outclassed by simple block features, block column features, random patches, and effective use of placement modifiers in placed feature files. Unless you need to do these exact things, pretty much exactly how vanilla does them, you're generally going to get more control out of recreating these with other features. So I'm going to lump all of these together at the bottom of C tier. And now we get to talk about the blue ice and the regular vine features. These are the first features we've gotten to that actually have no configuration at all. The blue ice feature is used in frozen oceans to replace the bottom of icebergs that are normally made of packed ice, so that some of them are made of blue ice instead. And vines are of course used in jungle biomes to place basically just random single vines everywhere. It's most obvious in caves or on cliffs, but it does technically add extra vines to a lot of the trees and trunks in the biome as well. Both of these applications can be done better and with more configurability with other features, and since you can't control these at all, there's no reason not to do so. F tier. And now that takes us to the Geode feature. Geodes are another feature I've talked about before at length, and even though disks have now been discovered to be a more performant method of broad block replacement, they still have a lot of things going for them. Since every layer can be configured with block state providers, including the air, but technically excluding the inner fillings with these amethyst clusters, which behave a little bit differently, and you can control their size, density, and noise factor, as well as what blocks they cannot replace, they can still be used to create both custom geodes and unique shapes in custom Worldgen. However, because they do have some limitations, including performance, I'm going to put these in A tier rather than S. Next up, we have Basalt Columns and Basalt Pillars. I'm lumping these two features together because their utility is very similar despite some differences. Both of these features are hard-coded to only use basalt blocks, which is an unfortunate point against them because their shapes are really cool. While basalt columns have some configurability related to their size, which is nice, the basalt pillars that you can find hanging down from the roof onto the lava oceans do not. All of their sizing and shaping is hard-coded. However, because they are still good at what they do, and their shapes are harder to recreate satisfyingly with other features, I'm going to have these be our first mentions in B tier. Which then takes us back to the basalt deltas with the Netherrack replace blobs, which unfortunately have kind of fallen from grace. In early Worldgen, this feature was super useful for replacing blocks at a large scale, not just Netherrack. It could support a very large size and didn't impact performance too much when applied right. Unfortunately, during the major Worldgen rewrite for Caves and Cliffs, their max size got reduced dramatically. They are still technically useful for replacing blocks, where they replace, as the name implies, Netherrack with mostly basalt and blackstone to kind of help pepper and decorate a lot of the basalt deltas, especially inside of the terrain, which isn't affected by the surface rules here. But they're not so useful if you need reliable coverage, such as to replace a feature that has a unique shape, like basalt columns. For that reason, I have to sadly put this in C tier. So now, let's talk about chorus plants. This is another feature that doesn't have any configurability. It does create a shape that is hard to recreate, and indeed, placing nice-looking chorus plants would be hard with any other feature, but I struggle to think of a lot of times that I would actually want either of those for practical Worldgen outside of just the end. So I guess I can put this around top of C tier. Which brings us to corals. Corals are such a tragic feature. There are 3 different coral feature types responsible for the 3 shapes of coral that you can find. Unfortunately, none of them have any configurability beyond that. They fail to place outside of water, they have all these extra coral bits on top. All around, this is another legacy vegetation feature, and so despite the unique shapes, it belongs in C tier. Now, deltas. I really like deltas. They're pretty configurable, and they create these really cool shapes. You don't even have to use fluids like the vanilla lava deltas here do. Even if they are only good for this type of shape and texturing, I can't justify putting this anywhere other than A tier, probably above root systems. Now, this next icon might be a little bit surprising to you. Did you know that desert wells are actually a feature? They were one of the first structure-like things added to the game before the structure system was implemented. Now, unfortunately, this also means that they are hard-coded, like many other legacy features. I have to put this in F tier, but we'll put it at the top as a sign of respect for their history. Which means now it's time to talk about discs. I talked about discs recently where I shared that they are incredibly useful for replacing blocks at a large scale while respecting performance, and have great applications for surface texturing and overall better custom surfaces. Vanilla might only use these sparingly, most commonly to decorate the bottoms of rivers with sand, gravel, and clay, but they are way more powerful than one might realize, and so they absolutely belong in S tier. Next up is the large dripstone feature. These large dripstone columns that you can find in dripstone caves are surprisingly configurable. You can control a lot of how they generate, including their size relative to the floor and ceiling, and how much the wind affects their shape. Unfortunately, similar to basalt features and their smaller dripstone cluster cousins, you can't configure the block state. They always place as dripstone blocks, and because they're so big and can stretch into neighboring chunks, they can be hard to replace even with discs or geodes, at least fully. Still, because they have a unique shape and a lot of configurability otherwise, I think top of B tier is perfectly fair. And with that, we'll move on to monster rooms. Monster room is the back-end name for what are colloquially called dungeons. Like desert wells, these were one of the first structures added to the game before structures were really a thing, so they're handled with features that, again, do not have any configurability. While this feature is still nice if you want or need the convenience of vanilla dungeon design, you can actually recreate this feature with almost perfect accuracy using another feature that we'll get to later. The only thing that's tough to replicate is their hard-coded requirement to connect to and open up into caves, but frankly, that's a small price to pay. Bottom of C tier, but not as bad as the legacy vegetation features. Skipping ahead a bit further, let's talk about end islands real quick. These are the little circular islands that you find throughout the end, kind of between the larger actual terrain. They're a neat shape. It's a shame they're not configurable. F tier. Now, end gateways and end spikes are once again tough to place. These are obviously used in vanilla to perform very important, very specific functions, and they do have some configurability in pursuit of those functions. The end gateway feature lets you define the coordinate that it returns you to, which is what's used for the appearances in the outer end islands to take you back to the starting platform, and can be pretty nifty for creating your own gateways in a custom dimension. The end spike feature technically lets you define the coordinates that each obsidian pillar appears at, whether they have a cage around them or not, and some info about their end crystals. But vanilla doesn't actually use this configuration. This is because vanilla needs to hard code how these work for their specific relationship with the Ender Dragon respawn mechanics, so that it can actually have the beams point to the obsidian pillars and respawn the end crystals on top of them, as well as have those point to the correct spot in the sky. Nevertheless, if you want to use these features in a custom dimension and don't need to worry about the Ender Dragon, they're good at what they do and they have some tools for you to use. C tier for both. We're moving on now to the forest rock feature. This feature is used to place these little boulders of mossy cobblestone in the old growth taiga biomes, and it's one that I'm fairly fond of. It does let you change the block it's made of, though it doesn't use a block state provider, so you can't do boulders that are a mix of cobblestone and mossy cobblestone, for example. However, it is a nice little shape and can provide some neat texturing to the ground of custom biomes. So I'll put this in, say, bottom of B tier. And now it's time to introduce fossils. I'm gonna bet that the majority of you have never found a fossil. Not the nether fossils you find in soul sand valleys, I'm talking about the buried underground fossils made of bones and occasional coal and diamond ore. Would you believe me if I said this is the single most powerful feature in Minecraft? Where desert wells and monster rooms are hard-coded features designed to look like structures, fossils do actually place structure NBT files as features, which means they can be used to create a variety of shapes for custom Worldgen, and are in fact the best suited way to make custom monster rooms. I'll be doing a video diving more in depth with these soon, but for now, these easily go in S tier. But then we come to the freeze top layer feature, which is another tough one to place. The freeze top layer feature is in almost every overworld biome and is used to add snow to the surface where temperature gets cold enough to support it, as well as freeze any water source blocks into ice if they are exposed to the sky. Both of these are things that you can technically do with other features, but when you do need to do exactly this, there's really no need to because it does it very well, very performantly, and even takes altitude into account. This feels appropriate for top of B tier just as a matter of convenience and utility, even though it's not really a configurable feature. Which is a great segue into Glowstone Blobs. Glowstone Blobs create some nice shapes to decorate the ceiling of the Nether. Unfortunately, they aren't configurable at all. C tier. This hay bale icon represents block piles, which is a feature that I've mentioned in a recent video. In vanilla, the block pile feature is only used to place these piles of hay in plains villages, as well as pumpkins and ice in some of the other village types, where they get generated by jigsaw blocks. I do think these are pretty nice for adding more texture to the ground of custom biomes, similar to forest rocks, and even though their shape isn't configurable or even as consistent as forest rocks, they make up for it with support for block state providers. I feel comfortable putting these in B tier. Now once again, we have two features here that are listed separately, but I'm going to kind of lump together, which is the huge fungus and the huge mushrooms. Side note, has anyone else noticed how pitiful mushroom islands tend to be recently? Red and brown mushrooms are two separate feature types, and both feature block state providers for their stems and caps, as well as some limited control over the size of those caps. If you want these rough shapes, they'll do the job fine, but you can't control their height, and they can be finicky to actually get to generate depending on your surface blocks. The huge fungus feature is the Nether counterpart and is used in the warped and crimson forest biomes, but they don't have much more going for them. They're generally not as picky as to where they can generate, and in fact, when we had early access to Worldgen, they were used for trees anywhere where we couldn't get actual tree features to generate. They also support block state providers for their stems and foliage, as well as block state providers for the decorator here, in this case shroom lights, which can be placed separately from the actual foliage, from the cap. You can also define what blocks they are allowed to replace and whether it gets obstructed by the ceiling. However, once again, you can't control their actual height or width in this case. I think both of these can fit comfortably in B tier since they're still useful when you want these shapes, and huge fungi are just a little bit more useful because they have less restrictions. I'm not even going to show any ice spike footage. Their shape is cool, they're not configurable, C tier. Now, icebergs are actually pretty neat. They do have some hard-coded behavior, like only generating at sea level and sometimes having snow on top of them. And of course, their shape and size. None of that can be configured. However, you can change the block they're made of, though not with a block state provider, so that's nice. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I'm going to put this in C tier. Now, lakes are another feature that have lost a lot of functionality in recent years. Previously, this feature type was used both for the lava lakes that we have now, as well as very similar water lakes, which were way more common. However, something changed recently, and this feature actually no longer supports water as a fluid that you can define in the feature type. It ends up crashing the game. And for this reason, along with a general lack of need anymore due to the introduction of aquifers, water lakes have been removed from the game. Despite these limitations, lakes are still pretty configurable and look nice when used as intended. So I'll put them in B tier. Trees. What is there to say about trees? They're my favorite feature type for a reason. They are highly configurable, have hardly any placement limitations, and can be used to create shapes that don't even look like trees. Trees go in S tier, absolutely. And I'm going to put fallen trees in A tier, only because of their addition of the place on log tree decorator type, which expanded the utility of both fallen trees and trees proper. Next up on the tier list, we have the Void Start platform and the End platform, which might be a little hard to see. These are just two small platforms, one when you enter the end so that you have somewhere stable to land, and one for flat worlds when you don't define any ground blocks. Neither of these are configurable, and although those gameplay applications are important, they're not useful for any interesting world gen. F tier for sure. Now, ores are where we break the rule a little bit. They are pretty cool technically. They support both block state providers for what block to actually place, so that's how we get gold, lapis, and iron all with one feature, and target conditions for what blocks they are allowed to replace, which is how we can get both stone ore variants and deep slate ore variants all with the same feature. They're also used to place the large blobs of dirt, gravel, and stone variants underground to add some texture to caves and things. Even though these applications aren't necessarily very interesting, and their use of target conditions is cool but not on the level of discs, this is a really important feature for any kind of practical world gen to ensure that a given dimension is actually fun to mine in. I can't justify S tier, but top of A tier feels very fair. Now this lump of features, random patch, flower, and no bone meal flower, are a bit contentious. I personally really like random patches. Vanilla uses them for a reason, and they handle everything from short and tall grass, to pumpkin patches, and even fires in the Nether. However, at a technical level, you would be forgiven for considering this a sort of legacy feature. The behavior of random patches is very convenient, especially for those getting into World Gen, But technically, you can do everything a random patch can with just placement modifiers in the placed feature file, placing a simple block feature, or whatever other feature you may opt to place, removing an unnecessary step and earning marginal performance improvement. Now, despite this, personally, I think their convenience and ease outweighs this technicality, and so I think it's perfectly acceptable to place this at the bottom of S tier. We're nearing the end now with the spring feature. Springs are responsible for the single blocks of water or lava that you see erupting from cliff faces as well as underground. These are pretty cool as far as configuration, allowing you to specify how many adjacent solid blocks there needs to be, as well as whether or not there needs to be a solid block on the bottom face specifically, which is how we get these springs of lava raining down from the ceiling of the Nether. I think B tier is appropriate for these. They're good at what they do, but if you don't need them, you won't use them. And the last feature that we have here is the fill layer feature. This is actually what gets used for super flat world generation. That's right, flat worlds don't use terrain or surface rules at all. They just use the fill layer feature to fill in each of the layers that you defined when you made the super flat world, and the fill layer feature is not used anywhere else in vanilla. It's not often you'll need to use this feature outside of a flat world, since it only replaces air blocks and tries to cover the entire 16 by 16 chunk on a single Y layer. This feels like a high-ish C tier to me. It's not often you're going to need it at all, but when you do, you'll be glad that it's here. And that completes our tier list. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more Worldgen custom structures and data pack content. To learn more about custom Worldgen and biome features, check the link in description for my very thorough written guide that I made for Datapack Hub. Please consider joining my Patreon to support the channel and participate in these NPC fights at the end of every video. Congratulations to today's winner, Melanie Kohler, and thanks for watching!